And there has been an equally drastic fall off in the use of humour over the last 20 years. And our industry feels that's maybe beneath them, or it feels it's inappropriate, or they're worried about using humour because you can say the wrong thing.
Hey there, James here, and you're listening to the Own the Moment podcast, the show where we explore the complex and always evolving landscape of marketing, advertising, and branding, and try to get to the bottom of what it means to be a truly memorable brand. The Own the Moment podcast is brought to you by Como Technologies, a self-service, complete customer engagement platform that helps you cut through the noise to truly connect with your customers and retain and grow those connections over time. With Como, you can build and deploy new campaigns, activations, promotions, and programs in days, not months, and our software is used by some of the world's biggest consumer brands, from Heineken to Budget, Goodman Fielder, Foxtel, JLL, Williams Racing, and McDonald's. Learn more at como.tech. Today's guest is Andy Nairn, one of the most respected and awarded brand strategists in the world. Andy has been named the top brand strategist in the UK by Campaign magazine 3 years in a row and has won an astonishing 24 IPA Effectiveness Awards. His list of achievements quite literally goes on and on and on. Andy co-founded the agency Lucky Generals, whose clients include the likes of Amazon, Virgin Atlantic, and Yorkshire Tea. Andy and I had a fascinating discussion around the role of brand purpose in advertising, whether or not they'd work with a fossil fuels company, and why he thinks advertising needs to rid themselves of the idea that it's vulgar to sell. Andy is simply one of the most engaging and clever people I've spoken to, so this is a must listen for anyone in marketing, advertising, or the creative industry. I hope you enjoy the show. Andy Nairn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Cheers, thanks, I'm really glad to be here.
First question, Andy. Obviously this week, my LinkedIn feed is exploding with people in Cannes. Are you in Cannes? And if not, why not?
I'm not in Cannes. This I go on and off to Cannes, so I don't have a huge, it has its issues, but I think it also has its benefits as well. The actual real reason, so don't feel too sorry for me not being in Cannes, is that we've just celebrated our 10th birthday, and we took everyone in the agency to Italy last week.
Wow.
So 100 people from the UK, but also from our New York office. So we have, I think our livers have been exhausted, all our brain cells, talking about, the future and what we're going to be doing. We've done it all ourselves, sort of thing. So I think I and everyone else is a bit spent in terms of going for more fun in the sun.
Sounds very reasonable. Andy, I'm so happy to have you on the show. You're obviously one of the most respected and well-awarded strategists in the world. Just to rattle off a couple of your accomplishments, you've been named the top brand strategist in the UK by Campaign 3 years in a row. You've won something crazy like 24 IPA Effectiveness Awards. The list quite literally goes on and on. Andy, what makes you so good at your job?
What a horrible question to start me with.
I thought you might not like that one.
It is that sort of cliche, I'm afraid, where it's other people. You surround yourself by really good people, and then you will end up looking, good. So if you can, I guess if I've done anything, it's sort of helped to craft a team. Now, I'm very lucky because I've got two amazing partners that I've worked with for a long, long time. I mean, best part of 20 years, in Helen Calcraft and Danny Brooke Taylor. And then together we built an amazing team around ourselves. We've got great clients. When you run your own agency, you can choose, who you work with. So we turned down lots of brands and people that we wouldn't, work as well with. And so when you do all of those things, when you cultivate, you create your own little work atmosphere where you can do all your best stuff. You're very fortunate to be able to do that. I appreciate that a lot of people don't have that freedom to do it, but if you do, you end up looking good because you're sort of like maximizing all the conditions for you to succeed. So I think that's a big part of it. It's lots of other really good people.
So I'll take the focus off you for a moment because I know that's like you said, that's an awkward and hard thing to do. But what makes a good strategist then? Someone who is very good at that role. What are the elements? What's the sort of what are the ingredients to being really good at strategy?
I think first and foremost it is curiosity about people and human beings and sort of what makes them tick. I've always found there's not no such thing as a boring brief. I always hate that when people say the brief's a bit boring, because I think every category, I've worked on things like tax. I've worked on that for like about 10 years. Like how to get people to do tax returns. It's really interesting because it's all about human nature and our desire to procrastinate and our relationship with authority and with technology and all sorts of like bigger sort of things. So I've worked on business to business briefs, which are supposed to be boring, but actually like it's really interesting about internal company politics and why people we imagine that people buy huge contracts in the business sector on the basis of pure logic and price and sort of rational spec. It's the absolute opposite. It's probably more emotional, because people are worried about their careers and what their boss thinks and all sorts of other sort of very emotional things. So I find first and foremost that good planners are people who can find something really interesting and big and cultural and human and emotional, even in what look like quite humdrum sort of sectors. And then I think the other big thing that is a lot easier said than done is keeping things simple. I'm a great believer in simple strategy, and where I think a lot of strategists go wrong is that they overcomplicate things and overthink things and make things terribly profound when they don't need to be. I'm all about action and simplicity and turning it into something that can sort of be used.
It's interesting. I have a question I want to ask in a little bit about technology, which I've heard you talking about before in that regard of simplicity. One of the things I've heard you say is, it's sort of all about the insight and, to your point around tax and, finding the sort of the interesting insight that maybe leads to some sort of, creative breakthrough. How do you go about finding insights and what does, what puts people in the state of mind to sort of uncover, I guess, or discover insights, with lateral thinking or, how do you go about trying to find insight?
I think the important thing is not to stress out about it, because it can sound a terrifying word that you've got to come up with some extraordinary revelation that no one has ever come up with ever before, or as I say, something so profound that that people's heads will explode, sort of thing. And so people set such a high bar, and I think it can be simpler than that sometimes. And insights can come from everywhere. They don't have to come from consumers, for instance. Sometimes you get great insight by doing a factory tour, like walking around the offices or the factory of Yorkshire Tea and seeing one of our planners seeing a sort of a sign on the wall, poster sort of saying we do things proper. Okay, that's interesting. That wasn't from a focus group. That was from a factory wall. That's kind of interesting because it tells you what about the culture of that sort of company. So it can be from company culture, it can be from people, it can be from society at large, culture more generally rather than my own specific target audience. It can be from social media, it can be a chance conversation. I think I'm a big believer in insights from all sorts of places, not just from conventional research, although they can obviously come from that place too.
That's very interesting. And I get this sense almost that insight can be sort of uncovered rather than manufactured. It's sort of, they're there. You just need to sort of stumble upon them or something, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, usually I think that is the case. It's a bit like comedians who use insight really well, don't they? Like when a comedian says something that we all nod our heads at and go, oh my God, that is so true, I do that. It's a sort of a weird sort of, the best jokes are often things that we immediately get and think, oh my God, that is so true.
Right.
But I've never heard anyone voice that before. So that's what makes it fresh and interesting. It's a kind of duality between a truth, but sort of, I've never heard it quite sort of, you feel seen sort of thing. You think, oh my God, that is me. And I think a lot of good advertising, a lot of brand building does that as well.
That's fascinating. And I just want to sort of get into the weeds for a moment on Yorkshire Tea. I think, researching you and your background, and that's obviously one of the, I guess, potentially, I don't know if you would agree, but most successful pieces of work you've worked on. What is it about an insight like proper that is so, or I guess I was about to say profound. Maybe it's not that it's profound, but that it led to such great work. How can something as sort of simple sounding as they do things proper help them go from number 3 to number 1 in the market in a fairly short amount of time? How do you use that then to create such success?
This is a good example of that. This is something I've got absolutely literally nothing to do with. I preside over the agency that's done it, and there's a great team of people who have done this, so I mustn't claim any responsibility here. But the team there, we did a pitch, as which is always a bit of an odd sort of artificial sort of exercise, and they knew I think that the company had done things with proper before because it's part of their they've got a very Yorkshire. It's very sort of a Yorkshire word, that isn't it? We do things proper, but hadn't quite made it work. And so when our team were walking around the factory, what was interesting was that yes, they make tea properly as you would expect, and they've got very high standards when it comes to quality control, and they use the best ingredients from the best places and all that kind of stuff. It's quite boring, that though, was their observation, and they couldn't really make anything very interesting out of it. And what was the big unlock was, again, just spending time up there in Harrogate and going into reception. They noticed that the receptionists were amazing. Like, God, these are like the best receptionists that anyone had ever experienced in all these years of advertising. And all the people like the couriers or the delivery people just seemed like super efficient and brilliant. And at every level, the people there just seemed to be incredibly warm, friendly, very good at the jobs. And the sort of unlock there was to think maybe that's more interesting, because if you, rather than bang on about how proper our tea making processes are, which is a bit boring, if we say we do everything proper, from the hold music, to the way we interview people, to the way that we deliver the product or whatever it is, then just think how proper the tea must be. But if they put that much attention into that sort of stuff, just think how much attention they put into the tea. And that became the big unlock. So rather than doing sort of very boring sort of product stuff, then you obviously have to exaggerate it and sort of bring it to life. And the big unlock there was creatively to use, Yorkshire, heroes. People like Parky would be doing the interview, and Sean Bean would be doing the company pep talk, and lots of other sort of greats would be doing all sorts of, the Brownlee brothers would be doing the sort of couriering the products in. Patrick Stewart would be doing the leaving speech. You just get the best person in the world to do whatever that job was. And wow, if they put that much attention into that job, think how much attention they put into the tea. And it's been phenomenal, as you say. It's taken them from a very distant third to a very, very, very clear first in a market that people kind of assumed would never change, because the top two positions had been sewn up for decades, really.
It's fascinating. Andy, you've said online that you really want to buck the trend of obsession in your industry with technology. What should I make of that? And what mistakes are brands and marketing teams making when they obsess over technology? And maybe share some examples of where you've seen that go wrong.
It's putting technology first thing. I mean, obviously we are very technologically, if I can say that word, savvy. And, some of our big, we work with Amazon. We've worked with Amazon almost from the beginning, and it's been such a privilege to learn from them. We work with people like TikTok, we work with Zoopla, all sorts of brands that use technology in various ways. But what I've learned from them and other great brands is that the technology is the servant of human beings. They don't start with that idea. And Jeff Bezos is a great example of this. When every year, I know he's less involved now, but when analysts used to ask him every year, what's the big tech change this year, he would always say, not really interested in what the big tech change is. I'm interested in the things that don't change about human nature. People are always going to want things cheaper, faster, more efficiently, more personalized, all those sort of things. And then I start from that premise about understanding people. That's what I want Amazon to be, he always used to say, the most customer-centric company in the world, not the most technologically clever brand in the world, but the most customer-centric brand in the world. And then, of course, we will use all our amazing technology, which they do have at Amazon.
Sure.
And I feel like that's how they've got so unbelievably successful. It's not just because of the tech, it's because of their relentless interest in people. And I think at the moment, where we make a mistake as an industry is, obviously at the moment, artificial intelligence is on everyone's lips. About 6 months ago, it was, the metaverse. And it's sort of ridiculous, isn't it? How metaverse for about a month was everything, wasn't it?
I know.
And and then it's just withered and everyone's moved on to the next thing. And people were, it's a bit like when Second Life, was sort of
right.
a thing, and everyone was opening up in Second Life, and there was no reason to do it. And because there's no consumer reason, it was a bit, so I think artificial intelligence is going to massively, revolutionize all sorts of aspects of industry. But let's start with people and their needs first, rather than the answer. Before you even ask the question, the answer becomes, let's do an AI idea. Well, why? Let's think of what we're doing first, and then that could be an interesting answer to it by using AI.
Right, it's tools and tactics change, and fundamentals don't. I think that's a great way to put it. You wrote an article recently, Andy, where you spoke about too many ideas have no connection with consumers. What did you mean by that?
Maybe a little bit of what I've just said there. Maybe people starting with technology for the sake of it, and not really starting with people. I think the other thing more recently has been, I think there's a divergence of creative standards from what ordinary people like and appreciate and what works to what we like in our own industry. It's always been there. Obviously, there's always a bit of a tension between the industry making stuff for its own enjoyment, but I think at its heart there's usually been quite a big crossover, and I think that crossover is less and less now. If you take the use of humour, for instance, you look at every statistic from all around the world, there is a massive preference amongst ordinary people for funny communications. Probably even more so now that, in the last couple of years when times have been a bit grim. And there has been an equally drastic fall off in the use of humour over the last 20 years. And our industry doesn't feel like, it feels that's maybe beneath them, or it feels it's inappropriate. They're worried about using humour because you can say the wrong thing, or there's lots of reasons that, but that's one example of where the stuff that is going to get you talked about down the pub or at the school gates, a lot of the time is not reflected in the work that wins loads of awards at, Cannes or various other places.
Yeah, I had Orlando Wood on a couple of weeks ago, and of course we dug into that whole idea of left and right brand advertising, which I think captures a lot of what you're saying. And I think just one of the anecdotal things we spoke about on that show was, if you think back to a lot of the sort of great ads of the 90s, especially on TV, especially in Australia, they were funny, they were regional, they were sort of contextually sort of rich and interesting. And I think Orlando and Ian, obviously, where a lot of that comes from, is completely right that we've definitely seen a move away from that, which I think is really sad because, it's obviously less effective and less memorable. So it's sort of strange to see it happening. But I don't know what your take is, Andy, but I sense a little bit of a potential fork in the road, or maybe a turning point, or, I hear it being talked about a lot more in it anyway. So.
Yeah, I think that is right. People are getting a bit sort of, I think it's just become so noticeable. And I think during, the kind of very odd years that we've had, the lockdown and COVID and all that kind of sort of stuff, it became more pronounced, and people sort of talked themselves into this kind of crazy logic, in my mind, that but now times are really tough now, and people are sort of, have got very real problems on their hands. Of course they do.
Sure.
And therefore we must be even more somber and serious than usual. And, do you remember that moment where everyone started doing exactly the same ad with tinkly piano music in the background and sad voices saying in these in these unprecedented times.
Unprecedented, yeah.
It's now more than ever. It's important. Blah 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 blah. And people didn't want that, because actually, you more than ever during times that are tough, you kind of want someone to raise a smile, obviously appropriately.
Sure.
And that's what we did with Yorkshire Tea. We did funny things all the way through.
Interesting.
Lockdown. We did. Of course, you've got to be sensitive and not do anything that's crassly, not in keeping with the times. But oh my God, people want to laugh. And the best thing we did during that whole period, it didn't cost a lot of money, but when everyone was going back into the office and they were worried about making a tea, we created a socially distanced teapot with a ridiculously long spout. It was a stupid idea. Obviously, the whole point was that this doesn't work, but we're just going to have to figure this out, sort of thing. And then we showed people sort of twitting about in the office with this long teapot, and people absolutely loved it. because it was, rather than us all being, it sort of broke the ice, and sort of, yes, we were all a bit anxious about going into the office and the hygiene aspects of making a cuppa for our mates and all the rest of it. But the British way in particular, I think, is to laugh about those things.
Right.
So yeah, more brands like that, I think, hopefully.
Yeah, no, and like you say, hopefully we're on the sort of on the precipice of a, maybe a little bit of a reset there, which I think would be.
That's what I hope. I hope that after that sort of very odd time, now as we come out the other side, that people are thinking, right, well, surely this is now the time for, the sea's got to change the other way, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because it does, feel like we are in a sort of interesting time where, I'm curious to get your take on sort of, brand purpose, impact advertising. Obviously, Bud Light has been, I guess, one of the biggest stories in our industry over the last few months. And I think what's interesting about that, and I'm curious to get your take on it, but, I remember I spoke to one industry person just as that story was breaking, and she said, I don't think this means anything. We've seen this before. These things blow over. Now, a couple of months on, we've seen sort of sustained revenue loss. Are we in like a new era, Andy, in that sense? Are we in a sort of, I don't know, is the polarization that we've seen in politics, is that now bleeding over into like every aspect of our consumer patterns, or was this always the case? What's your take on that story?
Yeah, polarization is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because the world is more polarized. Now, I think one of the this is an example. This whole debate really has become polarized between, there's some advocates that say purpose should be in everything. Absolutely, fanatical about everything should have a purpose. And then there's other people who decry it and say it's absolutely ridiculous. Forget it. And like a lot of these things, I'm afraid the truth is somewhere in the middle. That it can be a really good thing. We work with the Co-op. I mean, for 175 years, they've been helping people, and they have got a purpose to make the world a better place. We work with, the Guardian. We work with the Labour Party. We work with Virgin Atlantic. And all these brands have got purpose at their heart, and that they're set up to work in a different way, and they've got a different belief system, a different culture, and they walk the walk. That's the important thing. And
right.
That's part of the reason why you buy those brands. Like you can get cheaper, veg than somewhere else than the Co-op sort of thing. But some of the money's going to help the community and all the rest of it. And
sure.
So I feel like I'm hoping the new era is purpose can be phenomenally helpful if it truly reflects what organisation you are and provides a motivating reason for you to buy this particular brand. You can't talk about the Guardian without championing its wider role in society. It's not just an ordinary newspaper, it's a completely different beast sort of thing. And you can't talk about the Co-op without sort of reflecting that. So if that is your general organisational truth, go for it. If you're just sort of sticking it on as a little sticker, like that's where Bud Light came unstuck, didn't they? It was a very shallow marketing exercise, perhaps well-meaning, but
of course.
Then it's so flimsy, and then it sort of falls apart, and then they retreated very quickly out of it. They just dropped it, so there was no commitment really there. So it was almost the worst of both worlds. They were flimsy in their sort of support of the cause, and they probably ended up, pissing everybody off, I imagine.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really interesting, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Is that they did backpedal extremely quickly, which I think that poured fuel on that fire for everyone, because I think those who were opposed to it, they just looked at that and said, hey, look, they didn't mean it to, it was purely a commercial experiment. Which, look, I'm sure I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I suspect it was very well intentioned. So I think there's a great lesson in there. You guys have done a lot of impact investing. The Rainbow Laces campaign, Paddy Power, the Virgin Atlantic See the World Differently. Talk about how you've, maybe each of those, how you've approached that. I guess I'd be interested to know how you sort of avoid those pitfalls of, I don't know, making sure that feels authentic and part of the organizational story, and not just a bolted on feature. How did those come about, and how have you maybe sort of worked to make those as authentic and real as possible?
Yeah, I think it's, it's been baked into our sort of thinking from the start. Before purpose was really kind of a trendy thing. We set up to be a creative company for people on a mission. So that's how we described ourselves back then. We're still, 10 years later, that's how we think of ourselves. And so we like working with people who really want to do something, change the world in some way. It doesn't have to be a kind of big social
Right.
sort of way. It can just be make a difference. Being going from number 3 to number 1 in the tea market is also a mission.
Right.
It doesn't have to be some sort of
Absolutely.
super, social sort of mission.
Mm.
And so we're always open-minded. We're interested when we meet. We'll meet most organisations. There might be a few that we just think point blank, we're not going to meet these people because we don't agree with the way they do business. But sometimes we will at least have an initial conversation, because what if they were wanting to change the way they do
Right.
business? That'd be interesting. If we took a brand that had a bad record in a particular area but was genuinely committed to change, that'd be like a really interesting brief. So you have to suss them out. You have to see how genuine they are. The first thing we ever worked on was Rainbow Laces, and that was, as you say, it was Paddy Power. So you can imagine we gave them quite a hard look. Are you really, is this a genuine commitment, or is it just a bit of a silly thing? And what we very quickly said with them was, everyone's going to have this reaction with you as the same one
Right.
we have. We're going to be suspicious of your motives. So you need to partner up with Stonewall. And so we connected them with Stonewall, and we did it together. And what was amazing, and fair credit to both sides, it was the most unlikely partnership you've ever. It's like you sort of introducing your parents, or and your parents-in-law. We had a horrendous first meeting when it was like such as chalk and cheese coming together. Then the next meeting was a bit better, and by the third meeting, everyone could see what the other party brought. Stonewall could appreciate that this very laddie, sort of blokey, football fanny sort of sensibility was something that they didn't have. So they needed that, and they needed the reach of that and that understanding of that audience. And Paddy Power very much understood that they needed the genuine sort of commitment to the cause that Stonewall had, that would prevent people just saying it was a bit of a piss take. So that was a really interesting learning throughout. It was, then we did establish that we did have genuine commitment, and that campaign has gone on for 10 years. We did the 10th anniversary of it last year for the World Cup. And Paddy Power actually did show their commitment in the end by, after a couple of years, I think this is really generous-minded of them, actually, by the way. They realised that this whole thing was getting so much bigger than them and more important than them. They took a back seat because they were going to get in the way. They would prevent it going. So there was a lovely moment when tons and tons of brands wanted to get involved. At first, nobody wanted to. It was like it really was a bit of a taboo subject, and all the football authorities, didn't want to have anything to do with it, and they hated the fact that it was Paddy Power and all the rest of it. And then, but by year 2, and certainly by year 3, dozens of very big brands were getting involved. But Paddy Power realised that it'd be better if they just took a very much a back seat and let it have organic sort of growth and become very much a Stonewall thing, which is how it's been ever since. And so I think that, to me, that was a good commitment.
There's something sort of quite powerful about them sort of handing that over. And for anyone listening that's maybe not aware, Paddy Power is a sort of a online gambling company, which explains what you meant there at the beginning. That sort of sort of an unlikely coming together of brands. And so what about Virgin and See the World Differently, which actually just won an award, I think, recently for diversity or?
They've won loads of awards this year. I think just most recently they won the Grand Prix at the Purpose Award. So this is what I mean about, if you're a truly purposeful brand, then absolutely go for it. And Virgin has always been, that amazing sort of challenger brand. And part of that spirit has always been a genuine commitment, for instance, to the LGBT community. They've, just kind of a more sort of, I guess, liberal sensibility to life. They're kind of not stuck up, they're not stuffy, they're not conservative, sort of, I don't mean politically, but just kind of, sort of culturally sort of thing there. And have got a genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. And that's, goes back for decades now. And the biggest business challenge, of course, for them was when we took the brief on was that their planes had been on, in hangars for 2 years, and the business was, mothballed. It was obviously quite incredible. Everyone's business was affected, but the airlines were the worst affected of the whole thing. It was terrible. So then they had to get back into the air, and they had to remind, what were they going to say when they went back into the air, and how would they, attract flyers again, and also how would they re-galvanise their staff, many of whom had been furloughed, or how would they get new people? And there was a huge problem amongst all airlines about getting. If you think about the logistics of, you don't just start an airline up the next day. You've got to get people back into training. There's all sorts of rules about how long you got to practice and put in those hard hours before you back up into the air and all that kind of sort of stuff. So a massive recruitment exercise, and the airlines were really struggling. Because everyone's trying to recruit at the same time. Everyone had laid people off. And anyway, we wanted an idea that would work internally and externally. And the idea was see the world differently. So it's a good expression of what Virgin's always tried to do. They've always been that challenger who's seen the world differently. And now, of course, we're all coming out of COVID, and every one of us is seeing the world differently. The whole place has changed.
Right.
So it was a nice kind of double meaning there. And then to bring it to life, we put people at the forefront, and a very diverse group of people. And we just showcased the amazing brilliance of both Virgin's own people and flyers. People who want to do things a bit differently and not just fly the conventional sort of stuffy old flag carrier. And then you got to back up with the action. So what we also did was we had to think about, okay, well, how can we see the world differently? One way to see the world differently now is to change the uniform policy so that it's not so rigid sort of gender boundaries. There's a men's uniform and a women's uniform. There's much more sort of flexibility to choose within that. And so we did that. And then we celebrate that with a fashion runway on a runway. And what about tattoos? There's been an ongoing rule, again, visible tattoos in the whole airline industry. But it sort of seems a bit ridiculous now. But, in the cold light of day, you just think, well, there's so many people with tattoos and it looks perfectly. In fact, so let's sort of change that rule. So there was a series of policy decisions that we could then bring to life. And that's what it all comes back to. That's when you're walking the walk and not just talking a good game about it.
Yeah, and so how did that play out with Virgin? I mean, I assume given it's won awards, it's sort of it's made a dent in whether it's recruiting or, of course, hopefully commercial outcomes as well.
Yeah, it's been hugely successful. I mean, they were inundated. I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but they had the opposite problem of the whole of the rest of the industry. The rest of the industry were having to give people, sort of signing on bonuses, and were basically chucking money at people, and even that didn't help attract them because and they had to cancel tens of thousands of flights, and losing millions of pounds, because without the staff, obviously you can't get a plane up in the air. So that's where there was a whole year where British Airways and various other airlines were cancelling enormous numbers of flights. Meanwhile, Virgin had the opposite problem. We had too many people wanted to work with us, and the nice problem to have, it was so there was we were inundated with applications because it presents a nice, especially in this new world that we're all working in, the idea of being me, myself, and not having to conform to a script. Even a little thing. If you work for Virgin Atlantic, you're not given a script that you have to read out like True do in other places. Do your own thing within reason, but show your personality, be your own person, and people love that sort of atmosphere, and we're gravitating towards that. Dress how you like, do your own thing, chat how you like, bring your personality. That's and a lot of people now have to think about their employer brands as just as much as the consumer brands, because everyone's scrabbling after talent now. I think in this industry.
I mean, I can totally understand. I mean, I've just anecdotally got a friend who was a pilot, and then 3 years on decided stuff that, I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
So I can totally see that, and I think it's sort of a fascinating look at like the power of these quite simple insights or ideas, see the world differently. It, sounds kind of basic, but you can see, or I think what is so fascinating is how that can then actually play out and drive real outcomes.
That's it. It's a line. Okay, so you could say, it's an advertising slogan, but it's not really, because it's a line that is absolutely true. It's like that comedians thing. When you hear that, a lot of people have said, which I think is a great sort of compliment in a way, is that that is a line that Virgin could have used at any point in their history, but they haven't. So you get a sense of, oh my God, that is so true. That is that comedian's reaction, that I was talking about before. Right. You think, see the world differently. That is exactly what Virgin Atlantic have always done. And of course, now it's got added meaning because we're all post-COVID. And now it becomes this, every morning when I get up, whatever department of Virgin I work in, how can I see the world differently? And it gets, it makes you think, everyone else does this, we're going to do that. Everyone else bans tattoos, we're going to allowed to do is everyone else has rigid uniforms. We're going to do this. Everyone's, it's always a good test. Are we seeing the world differently, or are we just doing the same as everyone else? Is a good prompt.
It's interesting in a way, because I think there's a little bit of a red thread through this discussion, which is, if you go back to Proper and Yorkshire Tier, I mean, you mentioned there somewhere that, that was even a sort of a concept they had played with before. And, I see a little bit of a parallel there, which is, that what was something they had tried before, and obviously Virgin could have been using that before. And even that technology discussion, which is, not jumping on something new all of the time, but sort of, not looking back, because that sort of frames it in the wrong way, but sort of, I guess, trying to be consistent, and which, that makes a lot of sense. So, we touched a little bit on controversial industries and, paddy power in gambling. How do you guys think, I mean, there's been a lot of talk on LinkedIn about the Shell account, and, there's been pieces in Ad Age and Adweek around, is it ethical to pitch? You gave a little bit of an answer there with, if a brand's looking to change, but how do you guys, talk about, for example, the Shell account, or in any, I guess, sort of, controversial industry, what goes into a decision like that, and how should agencies think about it?
It's difficult. I don't want to be all sort of moralistic, but you just have to find your own compass. You got to understand that sometimes your feelings on these things are somewhat fuzzy. They don't always make sense. Sometimes logic goes out the window, because you might find yourself sort of saying, okay, we will tolerate this sector but not that sector, and someone could sort of say, oh, well, aren't they quite similar? But you just have to find your own compass, and then importantly you have to I feel like you've got to take your people with you, because you might get a question, oh, why are we working with those guys? Have they and I think it comes down to your own integrity. We turn down huge amounts of business because of the way that they run things. We also work with businesses who might have individual issues, or, because literally every company, including our own, has got something that they could be doing better, sometimes a lot better. And rather than just be holier than thou and say, right, we won't work with anyone, then generally I feel like you work with good companies, people who've got their hearts in the right place, and people who want to change things for the better. And that might mean that you work with things that are not currently perfect, but you're trying to make a difference for them. So yeah, we for instance, Paddy Power was an example. We were certainly not looking for a betting company when we started up, but it was the fact that the conversation started with Rainbow Laces, and then we subsequently did things for Greenpeace with them, and all sorts of other stuff. And now actually it's a nice full circle. We work with Gamble Aware, which is a kind of a more obvious,
which is I guess just it's an organization that raises awareness and
yes, exactly, and sort of addresses. It's not anti-gambling per se. I think that's kind of interesting, and I think we like their attitude, because, like a lot of things in life, I mean, there are some things that are just like wrong, full stop. But
sure,
but their belief is, gambling. I gamble occasionally. I'll sort of put a flutter on the Grand National, or occasionally or whatever. But that's a big difference from problematic gambling, and that's what sort of really needs to be addressed. So we work with alcohol brands. There's some big issues around alcohol brands, but we think that's one of the enjoyable things in life as well, and we can present sort of the positive sides of that responsibly. So you're always pretty much almost every new business request requires you to run the rule over that, and you just have to feel, what do I feel comfortable with, and we've just been lucky because we're never scared to turn down. Before we even started, it was very helpful that we got offered. I won't say their names, but it was a financial services company that we decided to meet because we hadn't started up yet. They were very keen, and we thought it might be one of these occasions where they wanted to change the way they worked. When we met them, it became clear there wasn't, and the business model felt quite predatory. It was like a credit-based business.
Sure.
And even though they were going to give us this enormous amount of money without a pitch before we'd even started, and it would solve all our, we sort of said, no, we're not going to do that. It was a bit like a game show. They had a huge big bag of money, more or less, waving at us. You could have this, you could get the speedboat. And we sort of turned it down because we knew that we wouldn't be happy, and we're not motivated by money as an organisation. Obviously we want to make money, but we're not just going to do any old crap to because there's so many great opportunities to do good work for good brands. I want to do good stuff in the world. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it obvious when a brand's faking it in terms of the purpose or impact side? I mean, can you tell straight away?
Yeah. We do. We have these meetings, and we, like I say, so we wouldn't do Shell, for instance. And again, not to be down on anyone who is sort of considering that, but that I feel like would be a red line for us. But if it was an organisation that was, somewhat less clear cut for our purposes, we'd have a meeting and we'd have a coffee and we'd sort of be very frank with them about their potential challenges and issues, and and then see what they had to say, and you can tell, and then we'll just sort of say no. We say no to a lot of those. We might say yes to the initial conversation, but we pull out of a lot of, or sort of decline politely. And again, we try not to be pious about it or overly wordy, but it's just not right for us. But we are always interested in people who genuinely, and you can tell it. We always sort of talk about them leaning forward and just sort of, and we felt it from that Paddy Power client was a guy called Christian Wolfenden, and we really looked him in the eye, and he proved true to his word. He was committed to that. It wasn't just a one-off stunt. It was, what has now become a 10-year campaign against homophobia in sports. So we thought, right, we believe you.
As someone I'll have to reach out to, I think. Andy, I could sit and talk all day and share, dig into the war stories, but I'm conscious of your time. So I'd love to move on to the quick fire round and start with a tricky one, which is your favorite marketing campaign of all time, any era, any brand.
Oh, wow. I mean, I love Guinness. I think what they've done over the years has been amazing. I particularly love the good things come to those who wait. But I think just generally to take what is potentially quite a niche brand to the number one beer brand in the UK, I think is pretty phenomenal.
That's wild, isn't it? Especially given, I guess, I love Guinness, but I'm assuming it's sort of it's a acquired taste for many. So
yeah, exactly. It's phenomenal, and to do that over so many decades of great advertising, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So the question I wanted to ask was, who's the best brand? But I might rephrase that on the fly to the most interesting brand in the world right now. And I guess we all know the obvious ones, the Apples and the Nikes. But what's a brand that you're sort of loving to watch and witness at the moment?
Obviously, outside of all of our own, because we're not allowed to have favorite children. Patagonia are pretty amazing, aren't they? I feel like they've, again, walked the walk. They don't just talk a good game. And I feel like they're on a different level in terms of being commercially successful, but also, genuinely driven by purpose rather than just pretending to play at it.
So, you can't walk much of a bigger walk than giving it all away, can you? So that's brilliant. So what's the most overrated trend in marketing right now? What's something that you're sick of hearing about?
Well, it's probably what I mentioned before. It's sort of spurious AI, which is not to say that AI is not going to be absolutely revolutionary, which it is.
Of course.
And I sort of cut everyone a bit of slack from playing with a new toy, because that's what we all do. But there's just so much of it is rubbish. It's about what we can do rather than what we should do. So amazing that you can do that, but it's not probably going to make any big difference now. So I feel. I'm
it's I don't know, 12, 13 episodes into this, and I think that's come up literally every time. So either we're all wrong, or we're all wrong.
It's unbelievably powerful, but
of course,
the fiddling around things that people are doing with it now, maybe that will help us get to the bigger solutions. Maybe that's a more charitable view of it. But
look, I think it'll be a tool like TikTok's a tool, and billboards are a tool. So what about the opposite? What's the most underrated trend? What's sort of what's ignored or marginalized or forgotten in terms of marketing tactics?
Oh God, that's interesting. I think it's I think one would be, this is going to sound like stating the obvious, but I think that is what perhaps is at the heart of the question, is long-term campaign ideas. I feel like that is, for as long as I've been in the industry, that's always been the holy grail. But they are few and far between these days. There's a lot of chopping and changing because people are chasing after the latest fads. So I think something as simple as coming up with a long-term brand platform and then sticking to it and not just changing it the minute a new CMO comes in or a new agency comes in. And what's interesting, I feel, there's a little theme recently in the UK. There's been a couple of revivals of running campaigns. So just last week, the retailer Morrison's came back with a line that's about 40 years old, but it's the best line for Morrison's. There's more reasons to shop at Morrison's. And it's you will never beat that line. So don't move away from that, probably ever. It can obviously flex with times and all the reasons will change.
Sure.
But I think it's kind of interesting. That I applaud that. And we shouldn't always be trying to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes that is you've got a great property, you should just stick with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the distinctive brand assets, and System 1 put out a report recently, or I guess it wasn't a report, it was something that I guess lots of people know, which is we give up on ads and campaigns far quicker than consumers. So we look at things 100 times a day and you get sick of them, but the consumer might not have even noticed it yet. And it's funny, I saw one of these sort of engagement bait things on LinkedIn recently, but it was quite interesting. I was looking at the Coca-Cola logo, and I think it sounds sort of trite to say it, but it is actually fascinating that they've never changed it. I know they tweak parts of it all of the time, but in an era where every luxury brand has redone their logo, I mean, to think they haven't actually changed that typeface in I don't know how many years. I mean, that's like that should be commended, I think.
Yeah.
Think of how many times it must have been trendy or,
Yeah, exactly. And there's probably lots of design rules that it breaks, and
right.
It's kind of that swirly font and all the rest of it is probably bad.
It's as uncool as you can get, isn't it?
Uncool, and it perhaps is, requires more space, and it could be, maybe how does it show up digital, all that kind of stuff. But it's, I think brands like that and companies like that are to be applauded for. Sometimes the hardest thing is just to hold your nerve and build on those assets, and rather than just try and rip everything up. That's a decision as well. That's not people sort of sometimes worry about that being an absence of a decision, but that is in itself a very brave and powerful decision some of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing as a new CMO is to come and get a new agency, rip everything apart and start again. I think that's very true. Last question, Andy. Who should I have on the show next? Who are the interesting people in the world and the industry I should be speaking to?
I've got two, I think. One's close to home, so this might be a bit of a cheat, but somebody, not Lucky Generals, but we've got a company in our group called Dark Horses, and the chief exec is an incredible woman called Melissa Robertson. I've worked with for decades on and off, and I think she's really interesting because she's just a brilliant business person, and currently she's worked in advertising most of her life. Has gone into a sports marketing job. Sport being a very macho sort of profession, obviously, and she's absolutely rocking it.
Wow.
And built an amazing team, been very successful. They've just sold to Omnicom, and on top of all of that, she's just a really powerful advocate for all sorts of other important things in society, like the menopause. She's really been at the forefront of that. So she's just an all-round interesting, brilliantly commercial, great creative, powerful sort of cultural sort of thinker. So she's great. And then my other one would be not connected to me at all, although I really admire her, is a woman called Shani Mears, who's from the Elephant Group.
Right.
And she's just phenomenal. A young woman of colour who is... I just found I've met her a few times, and I found her one of the most inspirational and brilliant and down-to-earth but powerful, persuasive people. She's sort of person you meet her but I feel like my batteries have been charged up after, you come away just thinking,
I love
she's
that.
incredible sort of thing. So I strongly recommend you chat to her if you get a chance.
Just to come back to sport for a moment, I think it is such a fascinating time for sport. I've had a couple of conversations so far, given just how much sport and sort of the landscape is changing with Drive to Survive and short form cricket and all of the different sort of trends that are changing sports. So I'll definitely have to reach out to Melissa as well. Andy, thanks so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it too. Yeah, we could have gone all day, but really, really lovely.
We'll have you back for another one soon. Thanks, Andy.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the On the Moment podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss upcoming episodes. And to suggest a guest or provide feedback, please visit our dedicated podcast hub at onthemomentpod.com.